You saved up for this trip for years. You planned every detail. You booked the flights, the hotels, the experiences. And then you landed in Australia, picked up your rental car, and within the first hour, without even realizing it, you broke a law that's about to cost you $500, maybe more. And the worst part is that you'll find out about it not at the roadside, not from a police officer, but from an email from your rental company 2 weeks after you've already gone home. Jet-lagged, happy with your memories, completely blindsided by what's waiting in your inbox. This is not a rare story. This happens to thousands of tourists in Australia every single year. And it happens not because these people are careless or reckless. It happens because nobody told them. The tourist information centers don't cover it. The rental car companies hand you a key and a map. And the rules themselves, specific, detailed, and strictly enforced, are simply assumed to be common knowledge by a system that forgets you just flew in from the other side of the world. That ends today. Because by the time this video is finished, you will know every single one of the 10 Australian driving rules that tourists break most often, why each one exists, exactly what it costs to break it, and precisely what you need to do to make sure it never happens to you. This is AU Driving Insider, and this is the video that every tourist should watch before they get behind the wheel in Australia. Stay with me. Every single rule on this list matters. Before we get into the rules themselves, I want to give you a sense of the enforcement environment you're stepping into, because understanding this context makes everything that follows land with the right weight. Australia is not a country where traffic laws are suggestions. It is not a country where enforcement is inconsistent, where cameras are easy to spot and avoid, or where being a tourist earns you any special leniency. Australia has invested heavily and consistently in road safety infrastructure, AI-powered cameras, automated fine generation systems, number plate recognition technology, and a nationally integrated enforcement database that is more sophisticated than most visitors expect. The cameras do not distinguish between a local driver and a tourist in a rental car. The automated fine system does not consider that you didn't know the rule. And the rental car company has a very efficient process for identifying you as the driver of their vehicle at the time the infringement occurred and forwarding both the fine and their administration fee directly to you. Additionally, and this is something that surprises many international visitors, Australia has bilateral data sharing agreements with an increasing number of countries around the world. Fines incurred in Australia do not necessarily stay in Australia. They can follow you home through your licensing system. So the idea of simply ignoring an Australian fine because you're safely back in your own country is becoming less and less viable with every passing year. The system is real, the enforcement is real, and the financial consequences are real. Now let's make sure none of them apply to you. The first rule is the one that feels too obvious to mention, and yet it is responsible for a genuinely significant number of tourist accidents in Australia every single year. Drive on the left side of the road. I know. You researched this before coming. You know Australia drives on the left. But here is what that research doesn't prepare you for. The gap between knowing something intellectually and having your body actually do it correctly under pressure is enormous. Your driving instincts were built over years, possibly decades, of driving on whichever side of the road your home country uses. Those instincts are deeply embedded. They operate automatically, below conscious thought. And they are most likely to override your conscious knowledge in exactly the moments when it matters most, when you're tired from a long-haul flight, when you're navigating an unfamiliar intersection under time pressure, when you're distracted by a passenger or a navigation prompt, or when you're driving on a quiet road with no other traffic to unconsciously use as a directional reference. Research consistently shows that the highest risk window for tourist accidents in Australia is the first 24 to 48 hours of driving. The most dangerous specific moments are pulling out of a car park, making a left turn from a stop position, and navigating roundabouts. These are moments where your instincts kick in, and your instincts may be completely wrong for the Australian road environment. The practical advice is simple, but it requires genuine commitment. Drive slower than feels necessary in those first hours. Give yourself extra time at every intersection. If you feel disoriented at any point, pull over safely. Take a moment. Consciously reorient yourself, and then continue. And consider putting a small physical reminder somewhere visible in the car, a sticky note on the dashboard that says left, for those moments when your brain needs a prompt. It sounds basic. It saves lives. Rule number 2 is one that generates enormous confusion and a significant number of fines, particularly for tourists from North America and continental Europe. And it involves what happens at intersections that have no markings, no signs, and no signals at all. In Australia, at an unmarked intersection, you must give way to any vehicle approaching from your right. Not the vehicle that arrived first. Not the vehicle on the wider road. Not the vehicle traveling faster. The vehicle on your right. If something is coming from your right at an intersection with no signs or signals, you stop and you let it go. This is the universal default rule across every Australian state and territory. The reason tourists struggle with this is that in many countries, right-of-way at unmarked intersections works on completely different logic. First to arrive, or priority based on road size, or simply whatever the local informal understanding happens to be. Arriving in Australia with a different set of expectations and then encountering an unmarked suburban intersection is a recipe for either a fine or a collision. The mental habit to build before you drive is simple. At every intersection, before anything else, check your right. If something is coming from the right and the intersection is unmarked, you wait. Every time, without exception. Building this habit consciously before your first drive in Australia is far easier than trying to override a wrong instinct in the middle of a moving situation. Rule number 3 catches tourists on highways across Australia, and it catches them because it represents a genuine legal difference from what most international visitors are used to. In Australia, on roads with a speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour or above with 2 or more lanes in the same direction, you are legally required to keep left unless overtaking. The right lane in Australia is for overtaking, not for cruising, not for sitting in because it feels more comfortable or faster, not for staying in because your exit is coming up eventually. You overtake in the right lane, and then you move back to the left. That is the law, and it is enforced. Tourists who sit in the right lane on Australian highways, often without any awareness that they're doing anything wrong, create frustration among local drivers, and in some cases genuinely dangerous situations as local drivers attempt to overtake on the left, which creates its own complications. Beyond the social friction, police actively enforce this rule, and the fine is real and documented. The adjustment takes a conscious effort for a few trips if you're not used to it, but it actually makes highway driving cleaner and more efficient once it becomes habit. Stay left. Move right to overtake. Return left. AU Driving Insider covers this rule regularly because it is one of the most consistent points of difference between Australian road behavior and what international visitors expect. Rule number 4 involves roundabouts, and specifically the indicating requirements that Australian law places on drivers navigating them. This is genuinely one of the most confusing rule sets for international visitors, and getting it wrong is both common and consequential. When taking the first exit from a roundabout, turning left, indicate left before you enter. When going straight through, taking approximately the second exit, do not indicate on entry, but indicate left as you approach and take your exit. When turning right or completing a U-turn, taking a later exit on the right side, indicate right on entry, travel around to your exit point, and then indicate left as you leave the roundabout. The reason this matters extends well beyond the possibility of a fine for improper indicating. Roundabouts in Australian cities are shared simultaneously by drivers approaching from multiple directions, cyclists, and pedestrians. Every road user around that roundabout is making decisions about when to enter, when to wait, when to cross, based partly on the indicators of vehicles already in the roundabout. Incorrect indicating creates genuine confusion and genuine collision risk. Before your trip, search specifically for Australian roundabout rules and watch a video demonstration. The visual format makes the logic much clearer than any written description. Spending 5 minutes on this specific topic before you arrive could prevent a very stressful and potentially dangerous experience in the middle of a busy Australian city roundabout. Rule number 5 is one where the gap between tourist expectation and Australian legal reality is particularly stark, and it involves the rights of pedestrians at marked crossings. At a zebra crossing in Australia, the black and white striped pedestrian crossing, any pedestrian who is on the crossing or who has clearly indicated their intention to cross and begun stepping onto the road has absolute legal right of way. You must stop, completely, not slow down, not edge forward, not judge whether you can safely pass before they reach your lane. Stop, and remain stopped until the pedestrian has completely cleared your path. This is not the informal, negotiated arrangement that pedestrian crossings represent in many countries. In Australia, it is an absolute legal requirement with real fines and real demerit points attached to violations. And AI camera systems in many Australian cities are now actively monitoring zebra crossings for vehicles that fail to comply. The enforcement is automated and it is consistent. School zones deserve specific attention in this context. The reduced speed limits that apply around schools during school hours, typically 40 kilometers per hour in areas that would otherwise be 60, are among the most consistently enforced limits in the Australian road system. These limits apply during specific morning and afternoon windows on school days. Missing the sign because you're unfamiliar with the area is not a defense. The cameras in school zones are active, the fines are automatic, and the demerit points are real. Know what a school zone sign looks like in Australia before you drive, and treat them with complete seriousness. Let's stop for just a moment here, because if this information is landing with you, if you're realizing that Australian driving rules are more specific and more seriously enforced than you expected, then I want to make sure you stay connected to AU Driving Insider beyond this video. Subscribe right now and hit the notification bell, because this channel covers Australian driving law, enforcement changes, and practical road safety advice more thoroughly than anywhere else. And share this video right now with anyone you know who's planning to drive in Australia. We're only halfway through the list, and the rules still to come include some of the most financially significant ones for tourists. Let's keep going. Rule number 6 involves alcohol, and this is where tourists who consider themselves completely responsible, moderate social drinkers get caught in a way they genuinely never anticipated. The blood alcohol limit that most people associate with Australian driving is 0.05. That is the limit for full Australian license holders. It does not apply to you as a tourist driving on an international license. In most Australian states, drivers on international licenses are subject to a 0 blood alcohol limit, not 0.05. Not one drink, and you're probably fine. 0. Any detectable blood alcohol while driving on an international license is an offense in most Australian jurisdictions. The practical consequences of this are significant for tourists who enjoy a glass of wine with their dinner at a restaurant and then drive back to their accommodation, without ever feeling impaired, without ever considering themselves drunk, without any awareness that they are committing a legal offense. This scenario plays out across Australia constantly, and the consequences when it intersects with enforcement are severe. Fines running into thousands of dollars, immediate license suspension, possible criminal charges for higher readings, and a travel insurance policy that almost certainly voids itself the moment impairment or alcohol is involved in an incident. The rule for international visitors has to be absolute. If you are driving, you do not drink. Not a little. Not something that feels fine. Not because everyone else at the table is, and you feel okay. 0. Use a rideshare. Call a taxi. Designate a completely sober driver from your group. This is the only position that is both legally safe and practically sensible given the zero-tolerance standard that applies to your license category. Rule number 7 is Australia's mobile phone law, and it is more comprehensive and more strictly enforced than anything most tourists are used to from their home countries. You cannot hold your phone while driving in Australia. You cannot have it in your lap. You cannot use it on speaker while it's in your hand. You cannot check a message at a red light. You cannot glance at your navigation while stopped in traffic. You cannot touch your phone in any way while the vehicle is not properly parked with the engine switched off. The only legal way to use your phone while driving is through a properly mounted, hands-free system that is securely fixed to the vehicle. AI-powered cameras are actively deployed across Australian roads specifically to detect phone use inside vehicles. These systems can identify the physical indicators of phone interaction, head position, hand position, eye direction, even at highway speeds and through car windows. Infringement notices are generated automatically without any police officer being present. The fine lands in your inbox without warning. For tourists in unfamiliar rental cars who haven't set up navigation before leaving the car park, the temptation to just quickly check the phone for directions is completely understandable. Resist it entirely. Set up your navigation app before you start the engine. Connect your phone to the car's Bluetooth system before you move. Put the phone in the glove box where you physically cannot reach it while driving. One phone fine in Australia can cost you several $100s. It is genuinely not worth it. Rule number 8 catches tourists in cities, particularly tourists who are used to parking being a relatively informal affair in their home countries. And it involves the specific distances and zones around fixed road infrastructure where stopping is prohibited. Australian law prohibits stopping within 10 meters of an intersecting road at an uncontrolled intersection, within 1 meter of a fire hydrant, in a manner that blocks a driveway even partially. In bus zones, taxi zones, loading zones, and clearways during the hours those restrictions apply. These rules are posted on signs throughout Australian cities, but tourists who aren't familiar with Australian signage can easily miss them or misread them. Parking enforcement in Australian cities is active and efficient. Rental cars are easily identifiable, and the process for forwarding fines through rental companies to the responsible driver is standardized and quick. Attempting to contest these infringements from overseas after returning home is difficult, time-consuming, and rarely successful. The administration fees that rental companies add to the original fine amount mean the total cost is consistently higher than the infringement itself. Before stopping anywhere in an Australian city outside of a clearly marked and designated parking area, take 30 seconds to assess your surroundings completely. Signs, distances to intersections, hydrant locations, zone markings with applicable hours. 30 seconds of awareness every time you park costs nothing. Getting it wrong consistently costs real money. Rule number 9 affects the tourists who are drawn to the most spectacular and remote driving experiences Australia offers, and it carries consequences that go far beyond any fine. Standard rental car agreements in Australia almost universally prohibit driving on unsealed roads. Unsealed meaning unpaved, dirt roads, gravel tracks, the remote outback routes that lead to some of the most extraordinary landscapes on Earth. If you take a standard rental vehicle onto an unsealed road and anything goes wrong, a tire failure, a mechanical breakdown, an accident, your rental vehicle insurance is void. The complete cost of vehicle recovery, vehicle repair, and any third-party liability becomes your personal financial responsibility. Recovery from a remote location in outback Australia is not cheap. It can run to tens of thousands of dollars. Beyond the financial dimension, remote Australian roads carry physical risks that are genuinely unlike anything most tourists have encountered. Distances between fuel stops can exceed 300 kilometers on some routes. Mobile coverage disappears entirely across vast areas of the interior. Summer temperatures can be immediately life-threatening inside a broken-down vehicle without adequate water supply. People die on Australian outback roads regularly because they underestimated these realities. This is documented. It is not exaggeration. If remote road driving is part of your Australian adventure, and the landscapes absolutely justify it, hire a vehicle that is specifically rated and insured for unsealed terrain. Read your rental agreement completely before signing anything. Carry water in quantities that feel excessive. They are not excessive for outback conditions. Tell someone responsible your exact planned route and your expected check-in schedule. And do not deviate from that plan without communicating the change. The Australian outback is magnificent beyond description. It demands respect proportional to that magnificence. Rule number 10 is the final rule, and it is the most universally applicable one on this list because it affects every tourist, on every road, every single day of their trip in Australia. Speed limits in Australia are lower than what many international visitors expect, and they are enforced with a completeness and technological consistency that catches people off guard. The standard urban limit is 50 kilometers per hour. Many residential and school-adjacent streets have limits of 40 or 30. Open road limits are typically 100 kilometers per hour. These limits change frequently as you move between areas, transitioning from highway to town, from main road to school zone, from open country to suburban street, and the changes are marked by signs that tourists unfamiliar with Australian road signage sometimes miss. Missing a speed limit sign is not a legal defense in Australia. The limit applies whether you saw the sign or not. And speed cameras, fixed, mobile, point-to-point average speed systems, and AI-equipped vehicles are deployed across the network in numbers and locations that make meaningful avoidance essentially impossible. For tourists in rental cars, speed fines are issued to the rental company and passed on to you with an additional administration charge. And with Australia's expanding bilateral data sharing agreements, these fines have a growing capacity to follow you home through your own country's licensing system. Ignoring them is not the safe option it once might have been. Set your navigation to display current speed limits and alert you to changes. Watch road signs actively rather than passively. And set your cruise control at or below the posted limit on highways rather than relying on feel. Because on unfamiliar roads in an unfamiliar country with unfamiliar speed limits, feel is not reliable. AU Driving Insider cannot stress this strongly enough. Speed enforcement in Australia is comprehensive, automated, and does not make exceptions for visitors who didn't know the limit. 10 rules. 10 ways that well-meaning, careful tourists break Australian law every single day simply because nobody told them in advance. And now you know all of them. You know why each one exists. You know what each one costs. And you know exactly what to do to make sure none of them apply to your Australian adventure. Keep left. Give way to the right at unmarked intersections. Stay in the left lane and less overtaking. Indicate correctly on roundabouts. Stop completely for pedestrians at zebra crossings. Zero alcohol on an international license. No phone touching while driving. Check parking zones before you stop. Never take a standard rental on unsealed roads. And respect every speed limit on every road every time. These rules are not complicated. They just need to be known. And now they are. If this video helped you, hit the like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it helps AU Driving Insider reach more tourists who need this information before they need it rather than after. Share this video with every friend, family member, or colleague who is planning to visit Australia and drive while they're here. They need to see this. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you traveling from, and which of these 10 rules surprised you the most? I genuinely read every comment and respond personally, and I want to know what caught you off guard. And if you are not yet subscribed to AU Driving Insider, please do it right now. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, turn on all notifications. This channel exists to make sure that every person who drives on Australian roads, tourist or resident, new arrival or long-term local, has access to accurate, detailed, genuinely useful driving information. We do the research. We track the changes. We break it down in plain language so you never have to learn any of this the expensive way. Drive smart, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next one.